centuries.
Right, and it completely forces a recalibration of the entire historical timeline because, I mean, we all fall into this trap, right? This trap of viewing human progress through the lens of what historians call Whig history.
Oh, right. The idea that everything always just gets better and better.
Exactly. It's this comforting illusion of a neat, linear upward trajectory. We just assume humanity started with basic stone tools, and then we gradually mastered metallurgy, and we slowly figured out mathematics, and then marched straight toward the Industrial Revolution without a single step backward.
Right, like a video game tech tree, just unlock the next thing.
Yeah, but a discovery like the Antikythera mechanism, it just shatters that linearity. It suggests that technological evolution is not a straight line at all. It's a jagged graph. You have these massive peaks of absolute brilliance, and then they're followed by catastrophic collapses where profound knowledge is just erased.
It's just gone. And that erasure is exactly what we are exploring today on this deep dive. Because today we are looking at a brilliant historical exploration from the series The Unexplained.
Which is a fantastic series.
It really is. And we're pulling apart these specific instances where ancient catastrophes and lost artifacts completely challenge our fundamental assumptions about the past. We're going to look at the fiery burial of Pompeii, the sheer mechanical impossibility of that device pulled from the Aegean Sea, the architectural fallout of the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, and a complete reevaluation of the trauma written into the bones buried right around Stonehenge.
Yeah, and the through line connecting all these seemingly disparate events is really our relationship with the unpredictable. I mean, it's an exploration of how ancient minds tried to map out the mechanical predictability of the cosmos, right? Only to be constantly blindsided by the chaotic, violent realities of the earth beneath their feet.
The earth just deciding to ruin everything.
Pretty much. And crucially, we're going to look at the forensics today. We're using 21st century tools. I'm talking particle accelerators, phase contrast tomography, isotope analysis to decode secrets that were buried in volcanic ash or sunk in the Mediterranean or even hidden deep within human tooth enamel.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the ash. I mean, everyone listening is familiar with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD.
Sure, it's the most famous volcano in history.
Right. But the preservation of the Roman city of Pompeii, and specifically its neighboring town Herculaneum, represents this massive anomaly in how we actually receive history. We usually rely on what I like to call the survivorship bias of mediums.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Thanks. I mean, the cultures that carve their ideas into granite or marble, like the Egyptians or the Greeks, they left a lasting footprint because rock survives.
Right, rocks don't care about the weather.
Exactly. But cultures that recorded their greatest intellectual achievements on organic matter, like papyrus or parchment, they are fighting a completely losing battle against rot, humidity, and time.
Precisely, because papyrus is essentially just woven reeds. I mean, it is cellulose. In a standard Mediterranean climate, a papyrus scroll has a shelf life of, what, maybe a few hundred years?
If you're lucky.
Yeah, before it just degrades into absolute dust. So the only reason we have anything older than that is if it was stored in the hyper-arid environment of the Egyptian desert, or, paradoxically, if it was subjected to the extreme violence of a pyroclastic flow.
Which brings us to the actual thermodynamics of what happened at around 1 p.m. on that late summer day in 79 AD. Because a pyroclastic flow isn't, it's not a slow-moving lava stream that you can just outwalk.
Oh, no. It's horrifying.
It's a fluidized mixture of solid rock fragments, expanding toxic gases, and ash, and it's moving down the flank of the volcano at upwards of 700 kilometers per hour.
Which is faster than a commercial airliner.
Right. And we are talking about temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, the speed and the heat are the critical factors here. I mean, when that surge hit Herculaneum, it caused instantaneous thermal shock. It was so incredibly hot that it instantly boiled the cerebrospinal fluid inside the skulls of the victims.
Wow.
Yeah, causing their heads to literally explode. It's gruesome.
Huh.
But for the papyrus scrolls stored in the libraries of these incredibly wealthy Roman villas, that extreme heat acted in a very specific, totally counterintuitive way.
Because it didn't burn them. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Because the ash cloud displaced all the oxygen in the environment, the scrolls couldn't combust into open flames. Fire needs oxygen. Instead, they were subjected to this process of rapid pyrolysis.
Pyrolysis.
Right. The intense heat drove off all the moisture and the volatile organic compounds, and it just left behind a pure carbon skeleton. They were flash-baked into charcoal.
Baked into a state of absolute suspended animation. It's like, okay, think of it like a completely melted, corrupted hard drive from a house that burned down. The data is still there, technically, but the hardware is completely fused together.
That's a perfect analogy.
And they stayed completely untouched under 75 feet of compacted volcanic rock, which is known as tuff, until the year 1750, so almost 1,700 years later.
Just waiting in the dark.
Right. And then a group of well diggers, tunneling down to find water, hit a spectacularly intricate colored marble floor, like Giallo Antico and Rosso Antico marble, just breathtaking stuff.
Yeah, they had stumbled into the Villa dei Paperi,
Yeah.
which is believed to be the sprawling luxury vacation estate of Lucius Calpurnius Piso.
Who was a highly influential Roman senator.
A senator and actually the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. So we are talking about unimaginable wealth.
And while the bronze statues they hauled out of those tunnels were magnificent, the true treasure of that villa was the library. The excavators found over 1,800 tightly rolled, completely carbonized papyrus scrolls.
It remains the only intact library ever recovered from classical antiquity, anywhere.
But initially, the workers had no idea what they were looking at, did they?
No, not at all. I mean, they thought these cylindrical black lumps were just pieces of charcoal or maybe petrified branches. They were actually throwing them away or burning them for warmth.
Oh, it hurts my soul.
I know, it's tragic. It wasn't until someone noticed faint, regular lettering on the inside of a fractured piece that they realized, wait, they'd stumbled upon an entire archive of ancient human thought.
Which immediately created this agonizing archaeological nightmare. Because you have this massive archive of lost knowledge, but it's locked inside a medium that is as fragile as, like, cigar ash. If you blow on it, it disintegrates.
Yeah, you can't just unroll a piece of charcoal.
Right. And I was reading about the early attempts to open these in the 18th century, and it reads like a literal horror story for historians. They tried slicing them perfectly in half with butcher knives, which obviously just destroyed the text in the cross-section.
Horrible.
Then they tried pouring liquid mercury over them. They tried dousing them in rose water to soften the fibers, which just turned the carbonized papyrus into a black, illegible, muddy sludge.
Yeah, they destroyed so much in those early days. A Vatican conservator named Antonio Piaggio did invent an unwrapping machine in the 1750s.
The Piaggio machine, right?
Yeah, it was this bizarre contraption of soap threads and weights, and it was designed to unroll the scrolls at a microscopic pace. I mean, sometimes literally a millimeter a day.
Wow. Did it work?
It worked, barely, on a few of the less damaged scrolls. But it completely destroyed the outer layers, and it often shattered the core of the scroll. So for the vast majority of the collection, the physical act of unrolling them simply obliterates them. Because of this, a strict moratorium was eventually placed on opening the remaining scrolls.
They just had to stop.
They had to. They've sat in a museum in Naples for over a century, completely untouchable.
Because the problem isn't just the physical fragility of the scrolls, it's the chemistry. The Romans wrote these texts using carbon-based ink. It was essentially soot mixed with water and a little bit of gum arabic.
Right.
So you have carbon ink written on carbonized paper. If you hit that with a standard medical x-ray from a hospital, the x-ray photons just pass through both of those materials equally. It just looks like a solid black void on the scan.
It's like trying to read a newspaper in a completely dark room. There's no contrast.
Exactly. To solve this, you don't need better physical tools like scalpels or silk threads. You need a fundamental shift in applied physics, which is where our IT specialists come in 2,000 years later.
Yes. And that shift came from the University of Kentucky, spearheaded by a computer scientist named Brent Seals. They realized they had to abandon traditional absorption X-rays completely, and they moved to a technique called phase contrast X-ray tomography.
Which you can't just do at your local clinic.
No, They didn't use a hospital machine. They actually took these fragile Roman scrolls to particle accelerators, synchrotrons.
Right, because a synchrotron fires electrons at nearly the speed of light to generate a beam of X-rays that is, what, billions of times brighter than a medical X-ray?
Billions of times brighter, yes.
Yeah.
And the brilliant thing about phase contrast tomography is that it doesn't measure how much X-ray energy is absorbed by the material. It measures the minute delay, the phase shift of the X-ray wave as it passes through the scroll.
Okay, wait, explain that a bit more.
Sure. Even though both the ink and the papyrus are made of carbon, the ink is deposited on the surface of the paper, right? Making it roughly 1/10 of a millimeter thicker and just slightly denser. As that incredibly bright X-ray wave hits that microscopic bump of ink, the wave slows down by an infinitesimal fraction of a second.
Ah, so it's looking for the speed bumps, not the shadows.
Exactly. The detectors capture that phase shift.
So they rotate the scroll 360 degrees in this synchrotron beam, capturing thousands and thousands of these phase shift images. The software maps the internal 3D topography of this twisted, crushed piece of charcoal.
And then comes the computational heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Because now you have a 3D model of a crushed scroll, but you still have to read it.
Right.
The algorithms have to track the microscopic layers of the scroll as they spiral inward, virtually separating the surfaces that have been fused together for 2,000 years, and then digitally flattening them out on a screen.
It is a monumental feat of computer science. It's absolute magic. And the texts they are beginning to recover right now are reshaping our understanding of Hellenistic philosophy. The Villa de Papyri seems to have been the working library of an Epicurean philosopher named Philodemus.
Yeah, Philodemus of Gadara.
And through this virtual unwrapping, researchers found quotations from older, lost texts, including fragments quoting Democritus.
Which is huge. Democritus being the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher who first proposed the concept of atomism around 400 BC.
Yes. The idea that everything in the universe is composed of physically indivisible, indestructible components called atoms, just moving through an infinite void. To see this profound leap of rational scientific thought preserved in carbonized ash is staggering.
What's fascinating here is the profound paradox of Vesuvius. I mean, the very destructive force that violently ended all these lives is the exact and only reason this knowledge wasn't lost to the natural decay of time. It really makes you think about how much ancient knowledge was lost simply because it wasn't caught in a catastrophe.
Oh man, that is a heavy thought. But there is a timeline overlap here that makes these unread scrolls even more compelling to a lot of historians. Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD.
Right.
That is roughly 40 to 50 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. That places it right in the primary window when the early Christian apostles were traveling the Mediterranean world, writing letters to establish the early churches.
Oh, yes. This hypothesis is highly speculative, we should note, but chronologically and geographically, it is entirely viable. Lucius Calpurnius Piso's family was immensely wealthy and well-connected. They collected texts from all across the empire.
Right, they had the means to acquire anything written down.
Exactly. So if early Christian documents, say original epistles from Paul or maybe early gospel fragments, made their way into Roman aristocratic circles, they could theoretically be sitting inside one of those unopened carbonized lumps right now.
If the team from Kentucky can successfully unwrap and translate a text like that, it would predate the oldest known Christian manuscripts by over a century. It would be a direct window into the foundational decades of the entire religion.
It's forensic history at its finest.
It really is. We are using particle accelerators to read Roman texts baked by a volcano. But, while Pompeii perfectly preserved the philosophical and literary achievements of antiquity in ash, that shipwreck off Antikythera preserved something arguably more shocking in saltwater.
Yeah, the transition here is seamless, because both mysteries require the exact same modern X-ray technology to decode them. The thematic link is the preservation of the impossible, but the Antikythera mechanism presents a fundamentally different problem than the scrolls.
How so?
Well, the scrolls were a known entity, right?
Right.
We knew the Romans had books, we knew they wrote philosophy. The Antikythera mechanism is an absolute anachronism. It is a piece of technology that simply shouldn't exist in the 2nd century BC.
When Derek J. de Solla Price first published his findings in Scientific American back in 1959, and he explicitly called it an ancient Greek analog computer, the archaeological establishment was highly skeptical, to say the least.
Oh, they hated it. The consensus at the time was that, sure, the Greeks were brilliant philosophers and architects. They built the Parthenon. But their mechanics were supposedly limited to simple pulleys, basic levers, and maybe water clocks.
Right. The idea of precision-cut bronze gear trains was considered a product of the European Renaissance like 1,500 years later.
Exactly. But Price spent decades meticulously counting the gear teeth on the surviving fragments. He had 7 major fragments and about 75 smaller pieces. And he deduced that it wasn't an astrolabe or a simple navigational tool. It was a highly sophisticated astronomical calculating machine.
But the device was so heavily corroded, so calcified, and just compressed by 2 millennia of seawater that physical disassembly was literally impossible. If you tried to pull a gear out, it would just turn to bronze dust.
Right. It wasn't until 2005 that the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, armed with a custom-built 8-ton microfocus X-ray tomography machine echoing, that Kentucky Scroll Tech finally peered inside the bronze matrix.
And what they found wasn't just a couple of gears stacked together. It was a microscopic labyrinth of 30 surviving bronze gear wheels. But, I want to push back on the word computer for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I think it misleads a modern audience. When you or I say computer today, we immediately think of digital logic, microchips, transistors, and binary code.
Ones and zeros.
Right. But this was an analog computer, meaning the mathematical calculations were physically embedded into the geometry of the gears themselves.
That is a crucial distinction. In an analog mechanical computer, the ratio of the teeth between 2 meshing gears literally represents a mathematical fraction. If you want to calculate the moon's position relative to the sun over a very specific period, you have to build a gear train that perfectly physically reflects that astronomical ratio.
I was looking at the gear schematics specifically for how they tracked the lunar cycle, and the math is just breathtaking. They didn't just track a simple 30-day month. The Greeks knew about the Metonic cycle.
Yes, named after Meton of Athens.
Right. They observed that every 19 solar years, the phases of the moon fall on the exact same days of the solar year, and 19 solar years equals exactly 235 lunar months.
Yes, 235 is the magic number there. So to map this mechanically, the engineers of the Antikythera mechanism needed a gear with exactly 235 teeth, or a gear train that resulted in the exact mathematical ratio. And they did it. They used a combination of gears to drive a pointer around a spiral dial on the back of the device, effectively creating a 19-year calendar that perfectly synchronized the solar year with the lunar phases.
But the manufacturing challenge of that is insane. To make this work smoothly, they utilized a gear with 53 teeth.
Right.
53 is a prime number. If you are a bronze worker in 200 BC, dividing a circle of metal into 53 perfectly equal, mathematically precise segments by hand, using hand files and simple compass dividers, that is a masterclass in metallurgy and geometry. Because if the teeth are off by a fraction of a millimeter, the gears bind and the entire machine jams.
And their astronomical ambitions didn't stop at the moon's phases. The X-ray tomography revealed that the device also tracked the Saros cycle.
What is that?
It's a period of roughly 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. The Saros cycle is the precise rhythm of lunar and solar eclipses.
Wow.
Yeah. The machine could predict the exact month and even the hour when an eclipse would occur, accounting for gear slop and tooth shape. Furthermore, the surviving inscriptions, which basically served as a user's instruction manual hidden on the cover plates, indicated that the front dial displayed the planetary positions of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
The 5 planets visible to the naked eye in antiquity.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets into pure, unbelievable mechanical genius. Because we know that planets don't appear to move in perfect circles across the sky. Because we are observing them from a moving Earth, planets sometimes appear to slow down, stop, and move backward across the sky.
Retrograde motion.
Right, retrograde motion. And the moon's orbit isn't a perfect circle either, it's elliptical. Meaning the moon actually moves faster when it's closer to the Earth and slower when it's further away. The Greeks, specifically the astronomer Hipparchos, knew about this lunar anomaly.
And to replicate that elliptical acceleration and deceleration using purely circular gears requires epicyclic gearing.
Exactly. And the best way I can explain epicyclic gearing to you, the listener, is to think of a teacup ride at a fairground or an amusement park.
Oh, that's a great visual.
Right. You have the giant central floor of the ride spinning around, that's your base gear.
Right.
But mounted on top of that spinning floor are the individual teacups, which are also spinning on their own separate axes.
Yes.
The Greeks built a miniature bronze teacup ride inside this shoebox. They mounted a smaller gear off-center on the face of a larger gear, and they connected them using a pin and slot mechanism.
It's just brilliant.
As the larger gear turned, the pin would slide back and forth in the slot of the smaller gear, causing it to speed up and slow down, perfectly mimicking the elliptical orbit of the moon.
It is differential gearing. Centuries before we thought differential gearing was invented for European clocks and early automobiles.
So here is my inevitable question, and it's the one that drives everyone crazy. Here's where it gets really interesting. If the Greeks had the mechanical genius, the metallurgical skill, and the mathematical theory to build a differential epicyclic gear train in 200 BC, why didn't the Greeks launch the Industrial Revolution?
It's the million-dollar question.
Why didn't they attach these gears to a steam engine, which we know Hero of Alexandria toyed with, and build a locomotive? Why didn't we see another gear train of this complexity until the astronomical clocks of the 14th century? Did we just lose the instruction manual for civilization?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it isn't a matter of forgetting, it's a matter of economic and philosophical incentives. We have to view this through the socio-economic reality of the Hellenistic world.
Okay, lay it on me.
The Greek and Roman economies were overwhelmingly driven by human slave labor. When human labor is abundant and brutally cheap, there is virtually no economic incentive to invest vast amounts of capital and research into labor-saving industrial machinery.
Necessity is the mother of invention, and if you have enslaved people to grind your grain and pump your water, you don't need to invent a mechanized water mill.
Exactly. Therefore, this supreme mechanical genius wasn't directed toward industry, it was directed toward philosophy. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't a practical tool for navigation. Sailors weren't using this on ships. It wasn't a labor-saving device.
And what was it?
It was a didactic tool. It was a display piece built for a wealthy aristocrat, perhaps a philosopher, to demonstrate a very specific worldview. By building this machine, the creator was making a profound statement. The universe is not a chaotic realm governed by the capricious whims of the gods.
Right, Zeus isn't just throwing lightning bolts randomly.
Exactly, it's a rational, ordered mechanical system. It operates like clockwork. And through mathematics and mechanics, human beings can understand and predict it.
The Greeks looked at the night sky and saw beautiful, predictable geometry. But, that worldview, that nature is a predictable clockwork, is easy to hold when you're just watching the stars from a balcony.
Very true.
The ultimate test of that worldview isn't the sky, it's the ground. And what happens to a society when the very ground beneath their feet, nature itself, behaves completely unpredictably and violently. That takes us out of the ancient world and into the 18th century, to November 1st, 1755, in Lisbon, Portugal.
The Lisbon earthquake. This is the historical pivot point where humanity's relationship with natural disaster fundamentally shifted forever. You mentioned the predictability of the cosmos. Eclipses are terrifying if you don't understand them, but once you do, you can build a brass machine to predict them decades in advance.
Right.
Earthquakes offer no such comfort. Even today, with our global networks of digital seismometers, we cannot perfectly predict an earthquake. In 1755, the sheer unseeable terror of the earth violently tearing itself apart without warning triggered an existential crisis for the Enlightenment.
To understand the psychological impact here, we really have to look at the geology and a specific timeline of the disaster. Lisbon is situated near the Azores-Gibraltar Transform Fault. That is a complex tectonic boundary where the African plate grinds against the Eurasian plate.
A very active zone.
Extremely. At roughly 9:40 a.m. on November 1st, a massive megathrust earthquake ruptured along that fault line in the Atlantic Ocean.
And seismologists estimate the magnitude was incredibly high, likely an 8.5 to a 9.0 on the moment magnitude scale.
Which is apocalyptic.
It is. The release of seismic energy was so vast that it caused the water in the lochs of Scotland to slosh back and forth, a phenomenon known as a siege, thousands of miles away.
Wow, Scotland. But in Lisbon, the epicenter, the shaking lasted anywhere from 3 to 6 minutes, which, if you've ever been in an earthquake, 3 to 6 minutes is an absolute eternity. Try counting to 180 while your house is violently shaking.
It's unimaginable. And the city was composed of tightly packed, multi-story masonry buildings lining these very narrow, winding medieval streets. When the seismic waves hit, the rigid stone structures simply couldn't flex. They shattered.
Right.
Approximately 85% of the buildings in Lisbon collapsed instantly, crushing thousands of people in the rubble. A 16-foot wide crack literally opened up in the city center.
But the earthquake was only the first phase of this trifold catastrophe, because about 40 minutes after the shaking stopped, the ocean receded, exposing shipwrecks and the muddy seafloor.
The classic sign of a tsunami.
Yes, and the survivors, who were fleeing the collapsing city and the dust, had rushed to the open docks of the harbor for safety because there were no buildings there to fall on them. But the tectonic rupture had displaced a massive column of water in the Atlantic, generating this tsunami. A wall of water, estimated to be up to 20 feet high, roared up the Tagus River and engulfed the harbor, drowning thousands of the survivors who had gathered there.
And as if the earth and the ocean weren't enough, the fire completed the destruction.
Right, the fire.
It was November 1st, which is All Saints' Day, a major Catholic holy day. Because of the festival, thousands of candles were lit in churches and homes all across the city. When the buildings collapsed, those candles ignited the wooden beams and tapestries in the rubble.
Plus, all the baking ovens were cracked open.
Exactly. The winds whipped these scattered fires into a massive firestorm that burned for 5 straight days, incinerating everything that the quake and the tsunami had somehow spared. The death toll estimates vary widely, but it's believed that up to 50,000 people, roughly 20% of Lisbon's entire population, perished.
And at the time, Lisbon wasn't just some small town. It was ranked alongside London, Paris, and Rome. It was one of the wealthiest, most glorious cities in Europe, enriched by the gold and trade of the Portuguese Empire.
It was a global hub.
Its total destruction on a major religious holiday, while people were packed into churches, sparked an immediate and profound theological crisis across Europe. You have to remember the intellectual climate.
Right, the Enlightenment was flourishing, but religion was absolutely still the dominant interpretive lens for natural events. The Jesuits, who held immense power in Portugal, immediately framed the earthquake as an act of divine retribution.
The narrative was brutally straightforward. God chose All Saints' Day while the faithful were worshiping to unleash this destruction because the people of Lisbon were sinful. It was a punishment for the moral decay of the city.
Blaming the victims, essentially.
Completely. They pointed to the fact that the red light district largely survived, which was only because it was situated on higher, more stable bedrock, while the massive stone cathedrals collapsed directly onto the worshippers. The religious authorities were calling for repentance, fasting, and in some cases, the persecution of heretics to appease God's wrath.
But this theological fatalism was met with fierce resistance by the Portuguese king's chief minister, Sebastião Sousa de Carvalho e Melo, who later became known as the Marquis of Pombal. Yes, Pombal was a pragmatic, ruthless, Enlightenment-driven statesman. While the theologians were preaching repentance and organizing processions through the rubble, Pombal's legendary response was entirely secular and utilitarian. When asked what to do, he reportedly just said, bury the dead and heal the living.
So what does this all mean? Essentially, while the theologians were arguing about divine punishment, the Marquis of Pombal stepped up and essentially invented the modern crisis management playbook. He looked at a divine mystery and responded with engineering.
Exactly. Pombal realized that arguing over divine intentions wasn't going to clear the straits or prevent the spread of cholera. He took absolute control of the recovery effort. He deployed the army to prevent looting. He ordered the bodies to be loaded onto barges and buried at sea to prevent plague, and he forced the able-bodied citizens to begin clearing the rubble.
But his true genius lay in how he approached the reconstruction of the city, right?
Yes. He didn't just rebuild Lisbon exactly how it was, he re-engineered it to survive the next disaster. Pombal recognized that the narrow, winding medieval street plan was a death trap. It prevented escape and allowed the fires to spread uncontrollably.
So he just bulldozed it?
He had the ruined center of the city leveled completely and replaced it with a rational, wide, gridiron system. The broad avenues were designed specifically to act as fire breaks and to allow for rapid mass evacuation if the ground ever shook again.
But the most revolutionary aspect of Pombal's reconstruction was the architecture itself. He worked with military engineers to design what is now known as the Gaiola Pombalina, or the Pombaline cage.
Right, the wooden cage.
Instead of building rigid, load-bearing walls out of heavy stone, they built a flexible internal framework made of timber.
It is a brilliant application of structural engineering. The timber frame is constructed with a series of vertical, horizontal, and diagonal beams, forming a rigid but slightly flexible wooden skeleton. This timber cage is then filled in with rubble and mortar.
Okay, so the outside looks like stone, but the inside is wood.
Exactly. The masonry provides insulation and fire resistance, but the timber frame is the structural heart. When seismic waves hit the building, the flexible joinery of the wooden cage allows the structure to sway and absorb the energy. The rigid masonry infill might crack and fall out into the street, but the wooden skeleton remains standing.
Preventing the building from pancaking down on the inhabitants.
Precisely. It was the world's first large-scale, standardized, earthquake-resistant architecture. And before they built them, Pombal's engineers actually tested the design.
Oh, the marching test.
Yes. They built scale models of the timber frames and had troops of soldiers march around them in lockstep to simulate seismic vibrations. This raises an important question, though. Consider the psychological difference between predictable phenomena, like eclipses tracked by the Antikythera mechanism, and the sheer unseeable terror of an earthquake. We still cannot perfectly predict when or where earthquakes will strike, making human resilience and architecture our only true defense.
Right. And Pombal went even further with that resilience. He essentially birthed the modern science of seismology. He sent out a comprehensive questionnaire to every single parish in the country, asking very specific, objective questions.
Like, what time did the shaking start? How long did it last?
Did the water in the wells rise or fall? Did the buildings fall to the north or the south? He compiled a massive empirical data set to understand the physical mechanics of the event, completely ignoring the theological debates.
It's fascinating because the desire to empirically measure an earthquake didn't actually start with Pombal. The struggle to understand earthquakes isn't new. In the 1st century CE, Chinese scientists were working on this problem over a millennium earlier.
Oh, right, Krang Heng.
Yes, in 132 AD, a polymath named Chong Heng presented the Han court with the world's first seismometer. And it wasn't a crude instrument, it was an incredibly elegant piece of physics.
The device is usually described as a large, ornate bronze cask, heavily decorated with 8 dragons facing outwards in the 8 primary compass directions. Each dragon held a small bronze ball in its mouth, and directly beneath each dragon sat an open-mouthed bronze toad.
It sounds like an art piece, but the mechanism inside is what's brilliant. It relied on the principle of inertia. Inside the heavy bronze cask, suspended from the very top, was a large, heavy pendulum.
Okay, so how did it work?
When a distant earthquake occurred, the seismic surface waves would shake the earth. The heavy bronze cask, resting on the ground, would move with the earth. But the heavy pendulum suspended inside, due to its inertia, would tend to stay stationary.
So the outside moves, but the inside stays still.
Exactly. This relative movement between the stationary pendulum and the moving outer cask allowed the device to detect the direction of the seismic wave. The pendulum would swing, triggering a series of internal levers that would open the mouth of the dragon facing the exact direction of the quake's epicenter.
And the bronze ball would drop into the toad's mouth with a loud clang, alerting the court.
It allowed the Han Dynasty to instantly know which direction to send aid and troops, even if the earthquake happened hundreds of miles away and wasn't strongly felt in the capital. Modern seismometers are just variations on this. They use electromagnetism and lasers now, but the foundational physics, a mass suspended on a spring or pendulum resisting the motion of the Earth through inertia, is exactly the same principle Trang Hang used nearly 2,000 years ago.
So, since the dawn of time, humanity has faced unpredictable physical trauma, like the devastation in Lisbon or Han China. But long before Pombul's grid streets or modern crisis response, where did ancient humans go when they suffered catastrophic injuries or illness?
Right, if you don't have a hospital, what do you do?
Exactly. This brings us to a radical reevaluation of one of the world's most famous monuments, Stonehenge. Situated on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England, constructed in various phases starting around 3100 BC.
For centuries, the archaeological consensus viewed Stonehenge primarily through the lens of astronomy and death. We know it aligns with the solstices, making it a massive calendar, and the surrounding landscape is undeniably one of the densest concentrations of Neolithic and early Bronze Age burial mounds in all of Europe.
The area is absolutely littered with thousands of ancient human skeletons, and when osteoarchaeologists really began examining the bones retrieved from these barrows, they found a staggering catalog of physical trauma. We are talking about severe chronic conditions.
Yeah, skulls with trepanation holes, where ancient healers actually scraped or drilled into the skull to relieve pressure.
Which is horrifying.
It is. Bones showing aggressive bone cancers,
Yeah.
severe spinal deformities, and acute traumatic injuries. The skeletal remains often show signs of massive localized trauma. One famous example is an individual who is completely missing a left kneecap.
Missing a kneecap.
Completely gone, likely from a violent impact or debilitating infection. And the same individual possessed an excruciating necrotic abscess in the jaw. Living with an exposed jaw abscess and a ruined leg in 3100 BC meant existing in a state of constant, agonizing pain.
For a long time, the assumption was just that life in the Bronze Age was nasty, brutish, and short. People got hurt, they died, and they were buried near the big, important stone circle. But in 2008, a discovery shifted everything. Two highly respected archaeologists, Professor Timothy Darville and Professor Jeff Wainwright, proposed a radical reinterpretation based on a massive excavation inside the stone circle itself.
They posited that Stonehenge wasn't just a calendar or a prestigious cemetery. It functioned as a healing site, an ancient temple for the sick and injured.
Are we looking at the Bronze Age equivalent of the Mayo Clinic? It sounds wild, but if you're living in 3100 BC with a shattered kneecap, you don't have antibiotics, you have belief. And dragging yourself 140 miles to touch a magic rock shows just how desperate humans have always been to survive.
And their theory was significantly bolstered by advancements in isotopic analysis, because Darville and Wainwright, along with other researchers studying the burials, looked not just at the bones, but at the teeth. Specifically, they utilized strontium isotope analysis.
Let's break down exactly how that works, because it's a perfect example of modern tech acting as a forensic time machine.
Absolutely.
Strontium is a naturally occurring element found in bedrock, and it comes in different isotopes, primarily strontium-87 and strontium-86. The ratio of these two isotopes varies wildly depending on the specific geology of a region.
Exactly. So the ratio in the chalky soil of Salisbury Plain is completely different from the ratio in the granite mountains of Wales or the limestone of the Alps. As rocks weather, this specific isotopic signature leaches into the groundwater. Plants absorb the water, animals eat the plants, and humans eat both.
And here is the crucial biological mechanic. When a human child is growing, their body uses strontium as a substitute for calcium when forming tooth enamel.
Right, because chemically they are very similar.
Yes. Once the adult teeth finish forming, usually around age 12, That enamel becomes chemically inert. It locks in the exact strontium isotope ratio of the environment where that person spent their childhood. It is a permanent, indestructible geographic fingerprint locked inside the jaw.
So when researchers tested the teeth of the traumatized skeletons buried around Stonehenge, the results were stunning. Testing revealed that 50% of these people came from completely different, distant regions. They traveled to get there. Their isotopic signatures proved they had spent their childhoods hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away.
Wow.
Take the Amesbury archer, who is one of the most famous burials there. He had a severely damaged knee and a painful dental infection, and his isotopic ratios matched the alpine foothills of Central Europe.
So you have a man in excruciating pain, living in what is now Switzerland or Germany, who somehow makes a journey across the European continent, crosses the English Channel, and travels inland to Salisbury Plain just to die and be buried near these stones.
It completely flips the narrative. That isn't a local cemetery, that is a pilgrimage site.
But if they are coming to be healed, they aren't coming for the local chalk. They are coming for a very specific architectural element of the monument. When we picture Stonehenge, we usually picture the massive sarsen stones, the giant gray trilithons forming the outer circle. Those sarsen stones are relatively local, dragged from Marlborough Downs about 20 miles away.
But nestled inside the monument is a smaller circle made of an entirely different rock. The blue stones.
Right, the blue-green ones with white spots.
Yes, spotted dolerite. And geologic sourcing has definitively proven that these stones do not belong anywhere near Salisbury Plain. They were quarried from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales. That is a distance of roughly 140 miles over treacherous mountainous terrain and across the Bristol Channel.
The logistics of that are mind-bending. The ancient Britons managed to move these stones, each weighing between 1 and 2 tons, 140 miles. The expenditure of caloric energy and human labor is astronomical. You don't do that just because the stones look nice. You do it because you believe those specific stones possess a unique intrinsic power that cannot be found anywhere else.
Darville and Wainwright looked to local Celtic folklore and the specific geology of the Preseli Hills. The region surrounding the original quarries is dotted with natural springs that, for centuries, were revered as sacred healing waters. The belief was that the water drew its restorative power from the bedrock itself, the blue stones. Ancient Britons, immersed in the power of nature, likely believed the majestic stones possessed an energy capable of curing their ailments.
Furthermore, some of the blue stones exhibit unique acoustic properties. They are lithophones. When struck, they don't just thud, they ring with a metallic bell-like tone.
Oh yeah. If you are an ancient Neolithic farmer, and you strike a rock and it rings like a bell, you assume that rock contains a spirit or a divine energy.
The hypothesis is that the builders of Stonehenge deliberately transported the blue stones to Salisbury Plain to harness that perceived energy. They were essentially building an esoteric hospital.
And we shouldn't judge this through the lens of modern medical science, but rather through the lens of faith and belief. Without antibiotics or germ theory, medicine is inextricably linked to magic, religion, and the placebo effect.
And the placebo effect gets a bad rap today as fake medicine, but neurochemically, profound belief can trigger the brain to release endorphins that actively suppress pain and modulate the immune system.
The psychological comfort of pilgrimage and the power of communal belief at Stonehenge was their version of healthcare. The pilgrimage itself is part of the cure, the exertion, the anticipation, the communal ritual upon arrival. They were attempting to assert control over the unpredictable nature of physical decay.
Just as Pombal built wooden cages to withstand the earth, the ancient Britons built a circle of Welsh rock to withstand disease, which really seamlessly brings all these threads together for us. We started this deep dive looking at how a pyroclastic flow inadvertently acted as a thermodynamic preservative, allowing modern particle accelerators to unearth the carbonized philosophical scrolls of Pompeii.
We saw how a shipwreck protected the mechanical genius of the Antikythera mechanism.
We examined the architectural and theological shifts following the unpredictable violence of the Lisbon earthquake. And finally, we saw how the desperate, hopeful pilgrimages to the healing stones of Stonehenge were driven by trauma.
It's all connected.
For you listening right now, it is a reminder that so much of human history is shaped by our response to disaster. And modern technology is giving us a second chance to understand our ancestors.
And I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. Think about this. We've seen how modern X-ray and 3D scanning technology was absolutely required to unlock the Antikythera mechanism and the Pompeii scrolls. Both of those artifacts were initially dismissed.
Right, one was a lump of coral, one was a burnt stick.
Exactly. So consider all the bizarre, unexplainable artifacts currently sitting in dusty boxes in museum basements around the world, written off as useless junk by past archaeologists. What revolutionary truths about human history are sitting right in front of us, just waiting for a technology that hasn't been invented yet to finally read them?
It's entirely possible the instruction manual to a lost civilization has already been found. We just don't know how to read it yet. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the established timeline, and we will catch you on the next one.